Hi Mr. Keddy, it's Edmund here, and today I'll be doing my first journal entry for the ISU, which will be talking about the purpose of my novel, as well as the different themes they talk about. So the book I'm reading is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, and essentially this book is set in Afghanistan during their civil unrest. So in the story, you'll be telling the lives of two different women. We have Mariam and Lila. As they were born in different generations and they have very different levels of education, Mariam and Lila both have very different ideologies surrounding love, family, and power. Lila is being forced into a marriage, and Mariam is very unhappy with the state of her current marriage. But their lives do get entangled by war, loss, and fate, and most importantly, at the very end, they endure dangerous situations together in Kabul, which make them form strong bonds as close as a mother and daughter relationship. So 1,000 Splendid Suns is set into 4 different parts. Part 1 will be about Mariam, the second part is about Lila, and the third and fourth part is how their lives get entangled together. So I say that the 2 biggest reasons why Khaled Hosseini wrote this book is because he wants to dedicate his love for Afghanistan, and he also wants to talk about gender inequality. But there are also many different themes surrounding the topics of warfare, love and family, power and education, and gender inequality. One of the biggest reasons why Khaled Hosseini wrote this book is because he wants to show his dedication towards Afghanistan. Hosseini is actually an Afghan refugee that went to the United States, but for most of his childhood, he actually grew up in a city called Kabul in Afghanistan. This is why in most of his novels, he actually explains Afghanistan's rich artistic culture, but in 1,000 Splendid Suns, he actually suggests and talks about many different problems that exist in Afghanistan. So, like I'm suggesting, Afghanistan is actually one of the major settings in 1,000 Splendid Suns. Hosseini talks about past traditions and modern influences and how they impact societal views on different topics like gender inequality, education, power, love, and family. Originally, we see that the female protagonist Mariam lives in Herat, a traditional and rural area, but after her mother dies, she moves to Kabul after her dad sells her to a man named Rasheed. She then sees how Kabul and Herat have very different views on the power of a woman. In part 1, chapter 11, and paragraph 19 of the novel, Mariam said that these women in Kabul were what Rasheed called as modern. Afghan women could walk among strangers with makeup on their faces and nothing on their heads. So in this particular quote, we see that Kabul is deemed as a modern city, and this is because they have greater gender equality. This is because now women are empowered through education and could be independent, but also they could decide how they want to appear. Rasheed is also a man with traditional views, and the fact that he does not accept this and deems this as modern shows that the traditional views are conflicting with the modern influences. So with these comparisons in writing, we see how one of the major reasons why Hosseini wrote this book is because he wants to share with the world the artistic culture in Afghanistan, but also he wants to make a point about the problems in the country. He's trying to make a point saying that the past traditions are no longer accepted in this modern society. So the next biggest issue written in 1,000 Splendid Suns is about gender inequality. Hosseini writes about the widening inequality in Afghanistan and why it should be countered against. So in the book, we see how Lila and Mariam lived through a period where women's rights did not exist in Afghanistan. Women were treated as a property of a man and were forbidden to take part in most of societal actions. So in the book, we see how these 2 women face hardships to take control of their lives. In chapter 13, paragraph 37, Mariam remembers how Nana always told her that each snowflake was a sigh heaved by an aggrieved woman somewhere in the world. As a reminder of how women like us suffer, she said, how quietly we endure all that falls upon us. So this particular quote is saying how women faces an immense amount of hardships, and it's because men have power over them. They were treated as property. And this quote really applies to the novel because Mariam is having an abusive relationship with her husband Rasheed, where Rasheed almost tries to kill Lila, and at this point Mariam only stands up for herself. But throughout the novel, we see that Mariam endures an immense amount of pain, where Rasheed at one point points a gun towards her head. In part 3 in chapter 47 of the book, it also says that God has made us differently, you, women, and us men. Our brains are different. This is why we require only 1 male witness but 2 female ones. So this is a quote actually said by a Taliban member, and it shows how men have more power over a woman because they are also at one point deemed smarter than them. But in this point, we also see that how men are trusted more than a woman, where a woman and a female is only worth half of a person's. So this is really showing gender inequality in the book. So one of the topics actually mentioned in A Thousand Splendid Suns is also warfare. And the book is trying to teach us about the horrible realities of war, where war doesn't actually benefit any party. And another thing to note is that people can overcome the horrors of conflicts when there's hope. So in part 2 of the book, chapter 24 and paragraph 29, a man named Bobby, which is Lila's dad, says, "Fariba, all these people know is war," said Bobby. "They learn to walk with a milk bottle in one hand and a gun in another." So this quote is very essential in the book because it talks about how war impacts all citizens. And we see that how in this quote they're talking about how when children grow up in war-torn countries, this hinders their experiences of joy in life and laughter and playing outside. This is because war actually shapes a person's life, and it always makes them want to be more careful and more aware of their surroundings. Chapter 49, paragraph 7 of the book, it reads, "Masood's violent end brings her no joy, but she remembers too well of the neighborhoods raised under his watch, the bodies dragged from the rubble, the hands and feet of children discovered on rooftops or the high branches of some tree days after their funeral." So in this particular quote, it talks about how war does not actually benefit anyone. And most importantly, the biggest victims of war is actually the citizens. In another quote, which was in part 4 of the book, chapter 50 in the 59th paragraph, it reads, "I'm sorry," Lila says, marveling at how every Afghan story is marked by death and loss and unimaginable grief. And yet, she sees people finding a way to survive, to go on. This is a very important quote about war because she's trying to say that even though if Lila is faced with death of her loved ones and Rasheed's abuse, she's trying to say that we are not defined by these people, but it's actually from the way we treat others as well as how we act on our own. She's trying to tell us that the past is the past, and in order to overcome these difficult situations and times, we actually need to find hope and find something to motivate us and inspire us to keep on going. So Khaled Hosseini teaches us about power through A Thousand Splendid Suns by telling us that we can either gain power through respectful means such as education or by abusive and violent methods. So in the book, we see how Rasheed owns Mariam through domestic violence, where now Mariam fears him. Throughout the book, we see how Rasheed beats Mariam, complains about her cooking and her cleaning constantly, and also at one point even forced her to eat and chew on rocks. And in part 3, chapter 40, and paragraph 56 of the novel, we read that Rasheed didn't say anything, and really, what could be said? What needed saying when you shoved the barrel of your gun into your wife's mouth? So this particular quote was actually said by Mariam, and she's trying to talk about how Rasheed is gaining power and dominance over her through violent methods. So throughout the book, violence is always used by the oppressor to suppress the weak. Hosseini actually teaches us about love and family in A Thousand Splendid Suns. He tells us that love is everywhere and it's a very powerful force. We see this in the book because in a country like Afghanistan, which is war-stricken, people still manage to find love. Also, another thing to note is that family doesn't need to be related by bloodline. It just has to be people who care for you and you can deem who's in your family. So we see this because Mariam is rejected by her father and her other siblings essentially, and the only one who cared for her, which was her mother, passed away. She's also in an abusive relationship with her husband and is in a war-torn country, yet she still manages to find love for Lila and also deems her as her family member, even though they're like strangers to each other. Lila is also in the same shoes as her, where she loses all her family and her lover, but she still manages to find love for Mariam, and they together manage to have a mother and daughter relationship. In part 4, chapter 5 of the book, it reads, "Mariam is never far. Mariam is in Lila's own heart, where she shines with the bursting radiance of 1,000 suns." So this line shows how love is a very powerful force, where essentially it acts as a beacon of hope. The bright lights affect a great number of people, and Lila is stating that Mariam's love for her will inspire her to pay that love to those in need. And in part 1, chapter 5 of the book, we also read that Mariam picks up 10 pebbles and arranges them vertically in 3 different columns. She puts 4 in the first column for Khadija's children, 3 for Afsun's, and 3 in the third column for Nagisa's children. Then she adds a fourth column, a solitary 11th pebble. So in this particular quote, we see how Mariam has a very large family, considering that her dad actually has 2 other wives, but she still feels very isolated and left out. This is because the people who should be in her family because of bloodline actually has no care or love for her. We see that her mom calls her a mistake and Jalil just buys her jewelry, so she feels no love from either of them. In another quote, we see part 2 in chapter 20 of the book. It reads, "She would never leave her mark on Mammy's heart the way that her brothers had, because Mammy's heart was like a pallid beach where Lila's footsteps would forever wash away beneath the waves of sorrow that swelled and crashed." So this quote was actually said by Lila, and she's trying to explain that her life, she's never been loved as much as how her 2 other brothers have been. And this is because Lila, although has a family, the only person who ever loved her or valued her was her father. This is because her mother does not care for her, and at times we see that she forgets to pick up Lila from school. And because of this mother's irresponsibility, several times when Lila walks back from school, she is bullied and harassed on the streets. And in the last quote, which was found in part 4 of the book in chapter 51, it reads, "When the children spot Lila, they come running. Some of them call her mother, but Lila does not correct them." So in this particular quote, it yet again shows us how family can be anyone. Where in Lila and Mariam in this particular scene visits an orphanage, and the children run up to them and call them mother. And although they are complete strangers between everyone, they all consider themselves as family because they all care for one another. And the memories they make together cannot be taken by anyone else. In conclusion, Khaled Hosseini writes 1,000 Splendid Suns as a way to express his love for his homeland Afghanistan. He wants to share with readers the beauty of Afghanistan. That's how he remembers it in his childhood. But he also wants to share with us the problems he sees. He first talks about the negative impacts of war, growing gender inequality, the idea of power and how it relates to education, and also he tells us about the true definition of love and family. He does this by narrating the life of 2 women in Afghanistan named Mariam and Lila. Thank you for listening.